What is nostalgia? Why is it so powerful and evocative of strong emotions in us? And how can we capture and relive nostalgic moments throughout photography? All this and more in this episode of Philosopher, Photographer. Nostalgia is a powerful emotion that can evoke feelings of longing, happiness, sadness, or nostalgia for the past. Nostalgia can also be a source of inspiration and creativity as it can stimulate our imagination and memory. Nostalgia can be triggered by various stimuli such as music, smells, places, or photos. One of the most common ways to experience nostalgia is through photography. Photography is a medium that can capture and preserve moments, memories, and emotions. Photography can also create and manipulate images that can transport us to different times and places. Photography can also influence and shape our collective memory and culture. But how do we create nostalgic images that can evoke and communicate our personal and collective memories? How do we use vintage photography techniques to create images that have a retro and nostalgic feel? How do we apply this philosophy to our photography? Let's find out. Walter Benjamin was one of the most influential and original philosophers of the 20th century. Benjamin was a German philosopher, cultural critic, media theorist, and essayist. He wrote on philosophy, literature, film, and art. He's known for his concepts of auratic perception, aesthetizations of politics, dialectical image, and the work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction. Benjamin's philosophy is a philosophy of history rather than ontology. He rejects the idea of a linear and progressive history and instead proposes a nonlinear and fragmented history. He argues that history is not a homogeneous and coherent narrative, but a heterogeneous and contradictory montage. He also argues that history is not a neutral and objective representation, but a subjective and ideological construction. Benjamin's philosophy is a philosophy of memory rather than knowledge. He rejects the idea of a fixed and stable memory and instead proposes a dynamic and fluid memory. He argues that memory is not a passive and faithful storage, but an active and creative process. He also argues that memory is not a singular and individual phenomenon, but a plural and collective one. Benjamin's philosophy is a philosophy of art rather than aesthetics. He rejects the idea of a timeless and universal art and instead proposes a historical and contextual art. He argues that art is not a pure and autonomous expression, but a social and political intervention. He also argues that art is not a static and finished product, but a dynamic and unfinished process. So how can we use Benjamin's philosophy in our nostalgic photography? Well, one way is to use nostalgic photography as a tool to explore and express our personal and collective memories. We can also use nostalgic photography as a tool to create and manipulate images that have a retro and nostalgic feel. For example, we can use nostalgic photography to capture the aura, the politics, the dialectics, and the reproduction of our subjects, such as objects, scenes, or concepts. We can also use nostalgic photography to create images that reflect our vision and message, using vintage photography techniques as our language. For example, imagine a photo of a Polaroid camera with the camera showing the instant print, the flash, and the logo. This photo can represent the idea of capturing the aura, as the Polaroid camera creates a unique and unrepeatable image that has a special presence and value. How about a photo of a collage of old photos, with the camera showing the overlap, contrast, and connection of the photos? This photo can represent the idea of capturing the dialectics, as the collage creates a new and different meaning from the juxtaposition and combination of the old photos. And finally, how about a photo of a vintage filter with the camera showing the grain, the fade, and the vignette? This photo can represent the idea of capturing the reproduction as the vintage filter alters and transforms the original image into a retro and nostalgic one. Now let's take a moment to understand why nostalgia is important in photography. Why do we feel nostalgic when we see or create nostalgic images? What are the benefits and challenges of being nostalgic in photography? Nostalgia is important in photography because it affects not only the mood and the meaning of our images, but also the well-being and identity of ourselves and others. Nostalgia is important in photography because it helps us to connect with our past, present, and future in coherence in our lives. Nostalgia helps us to relive and share positive and meaningful experience and emotions and enhance our happiness and satisfaction. It also helps us cope with stress, loss, and change and find comfort and resilience. And finally, it expresses and communicates our personality, values, and goals and finds recognition and belonging. Nostalgia is also challenging in photography because it involves not only the aesthetic and artistic aspects of photography, but also the ethical and social aspects of memory. It requires us to be authentic and accurate and avoid falsifying, idealizing, or romanticizing our memories. It also forces us to be critical and aware and avoid being manipulated, influenced, or controlled by others' memories. Finally, it forces us to be creative and original and avoid being repetitive, cliched, or outdated with our memories. As you can see, nostalgia is a complex and multifaceted phenomenon that requires our attention, awareness, and judgment. Nostalgia is not a simple or easy phenomenon, but a challenging and rewarding one. It is not a static or fixed phenomenon, but a dynamic and evolving one. And it is not boring or irrelevant, but an interesting and meaningful phenomenon. How can we be more nostalgic in our photography? How can we overcome the challenges and enjoy the benefits of being nostalgic in our photography? And how can we apply the philosophy of Benjamin to our photos? There's no definitive or universal answer to these questions, as nostalgia is a personal and contextual phenomenon that depends on each situation and each photographer. However, there are some general guidelines and tips that can help us be more nostalgic in our photography. Here are some of them. Before taking a nostalgic photo, research and study the vintage photography techniques that suit your theme, style, and message. Learn about the history, characteristics, and effects of different cameras, films, filters, and formats. Choose the ones that match your vision and purpose. 2. During taking a nostalgic photo, experiment and play with the vintage photography techniques that you have chosen. Try different angles, compositions, exposures, and lighting. Use props, costumes, and locations that evoke the past. Have fun and be spontaneous. 3. After taking the nostalgic photo, edit and enhance your image using digital tools and software. Apply vintage filters, effects, and frames that add a retro and nostalgic feel. Adjust the color, contrast, and brightness to your liking. Be careful not to overdo it or lose the original quality. And 4. When sharing your nostalgic photo, tell and listen to the stories behind your image and others' images. Share your memories, feelings, and thoughts that inspired or resulted from your image. Listen to others' memories, feelings, and thoughts that your image evoked or provoked. Engage in a dialogue and a connection. These are some of the guidelines and tips that can help us become more nostalgic in our photography. Of course, these are not exhaustive or definitive, and we may encounter situations that require us to use our own judgment and discretion. However, these can serve as a starting point and a reference for our nostalgic decision-making and practice in our photography. We have reached the end of this episode of Philosopher, Photographer. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something new. I also hope you feel inspired to use nostalgic philosophy and photography to explore and express your personal and collective memories. Remember, nostalgic photography is not just a technical or artistic skill, but also an emotional and social one. Nostalgic photography is not just about creating images, but about capturing memories. Nostalgic photography is not just about reliving the past, but about living in the present and imagining the future. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, comment, and subscribe, and hit the bell icon to get notified of new episodes. And I will see you next time.